Bullets tear through the quiet dawn of a sleepy western town as ordinary ranchers and retired veterans, men who've seen enough conflict to last a lifetime, rise up one final time to defend their land and liberty. Led by Miranda Vale, a fiercely determined woman whose lightning-fast draw shocks even the most hardened outlaws, Greystone Gulch stands on the brink of war. Imagine a showdown straight from a classic John Wayne Western, but this is real, raw, and personal. Families threatened, heroes tested, and villains as ruthless as they come. This story delivers action, honor, and justice in the American tradition. You've lived long enough to know true bravery when you see it, and today you'll witness a community choosing freedom over fear. Can they overcome impossible odds? Or will the ruthless Cross Legion burn their dreams to ashes? Stick around and watch the entire story unfold. And remember, if you love true grit and inspiring tales of courage from ordinary heroes, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that embody the spirit of America. The year was 1875, and in the far reaches of a dusty western territory sat a town that no mapmaker would boast of, but every passing traveler seemed to know by name: Greystone Gulch. It was an unassuming place at first glance, just a single thoroughfare flanked by wooden boardwalks, crooked buildings, and the inevitable saloon whose piano notes and rowdy laughter bled into the arid night air. No one expected much of a future from Greystone Gulch. Some said the land was unlucky. Others swore it was cursed. Whatever the reason, crops shriveled in the sun, businesses floundered, and the church pews stood mostly empty. The local preacher had given his final sermon 3 months earlier, then set out in search of a holier mission elsewhere. Folks joked that even the Almighty had turned his back on them, but there was a secret threaded into the dusty soil beneath Greystone Gulch. Silver, as pure and lustrous as any miner could hope to unearth, lay hidden in veins that crisscrossed the stony hills. For those with the right tools or the right cunning, that silver promised fabulous riches. And, as was the way in such lawless expanses, those riches also brought danger. In recent months, a ruthless band of outlaws, led by a man known only by his menacing moniker, Brannigan Viper Cross, had begun to buy up land for insulting sums, bullying small homesteaders into selling out. Viper Cross was tall and lean, with sun-leathered skin, his eyes as pale as bleached bone. He carried a revolver that bore more notches than any man had a right to claim, and rumor had it his cruelty was matched only by his patience. If you refused his offer, accidents tended to happen. Barns burned, wells mysteriously collapsed, and entire families disappeared in the dead of night. The local leadership folded under Cross's pressure. Mayor Vaughn, a once hopeful politician with a disastrous gambling habit, had quietly signed land deeds over to Cross's shell companies. Sheriff Brody Ellis, the man who should have protected the townsfolk, had proven susceptible to deep pockets and began turning a blind eye to each suspicious fire and every missing settler. There were whispers around the saloon that if you looked closely, you could see guilt heavy as lead on the sheriff's face. But no one ever voiced such accusations above a hushed breath. Nobody wanted a bullet in the back for speaking the truth. This was Greystone Gulch under the reign of Viper Cross, a place shrinking beneath a tyrant's shadow. Then one fateful afternoon in the punishing heat of late July, a lone woman rode in from the north, casting a small silhouette against the shimmering horizon. She guided her horse with an easy confidence and wore a wide-brimmed bonnet that kept her features obscured in shadow. She did not look like trouble, not on the surface. To anyone passing by, she might have been another hopeful soul come to scratch a living in the harsh soil. But inside that unremarkable exterior beat the heart of someone who had walked battlefields, seen cruelty, and learned what it took to fight back. Her name, as she gave it, was Miranda Vale, though the townspeople would soon learn that the name was as much a shield as the revolver she kept hidden beneath her skirts. News of the newcomer spread quickly, as such stories do in a small settlement. Some folks watched with idle curiosity. Others hoped a fresh face might mean a fresh wallet for their struggling businesses. Among those who took particular notice of Miranda Vale's arrival was Eliza Sutton, proprietor of the general store. Eliza had a knack for collecting whispers the way some women collect crocheted doilies. From behind her counter, she kept a keen ear on every rumor that drifted in with the tumbleweeds. It wasn't that Eliza was nosy, but rather that she recognized information as a commodity nearly as valuable as silver. And if she happened to help a person out with a quiet warning here, or a subtle nudge there, well, that was only good business. One sweltering morning, Eliza watched from her shop window as Miranda guided her horse to a stop outside. The stranger's arrival, quiet yet purposeful, made the hair on Eliza's arms stand on end. That was no ordinary traveler's posture. Something about the way Miranda sat in the saddle, shoulders squared and gaze steady, reminded Eliza more of a soldier than of some wandering pioneer. "That woman's got the stance of someone who's seen real trouble," Eliza muttered to herself, stepping outside to greet her. The sun was punishing, beating down mercilessly on the shabby, sun-bleached buildings. It took no more than a few words with Miranda to confirm that Eliza's intuition was correct. There was more behind that serene expression than met the eye. Once inside the store, Miranda inquired calmly about seeds, nails, and basic rations. She purchased them with hard currency, gold eagles that glittered when she placed them upon the counter. The unexpected flash of gold made Eliza's eyebrows shoot up. Genuine gold coins, stamped with a recent mint date, not the older currency folks typically traded in these parts. Where had Miranda gotten them? Suspicion and wonder flickered in Eliza's mind, but she kept her questions measured. "New around here, I take it?" Eliza asked, handing over a small cloth sack filled with seeds. "Got yourself some land in the territory?" Miranda's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am. Up near the North Ridge, about 3 miles from the creek. Might not look like much, but it suits me fine." She accepted the supplies and offered a polite nod in thanks. Her manner was so reserved it was disarming. Eliza recognized that caution. It belonged to someone who, for reasons unspoken, knew she needed to keep her guard up. "Is that so?" Eliza replied, forcing a pleasant smile. "Sure hope it stays peaceful for you." There was a deeper meaning to that final statement. Everyone in Greystone Gulch knew that any unclaimed plot near the North Ridge was exactly where Viper Cross and his men had begun testing for silver. Peace there was in short supply. Whether by design or ignorance, Miranda had planted herself in dangerous territory. Still, Eliza saw no fear flicker across the newcomer's face, no moment of hesitation at the unspoken warning. The only visible response was the slightest tilt of Miranda's head, a signal that she had heard precisely what was meant and what was not said aloud. "Thank you kindly, Miss Sutton," Miranda said softly, tipping her hat. "We'll see how the land treats me." Then she stepped out into the scorching day, leaving Eliza with the echo of her own uneasy thoughts, and a sense that trouble was about to unfold, perhaps trouble wearing petticoats instead of holsters. Viper Cross heard about the new claim that same evening. In the hazy lamplight of the mayor's cramped office, Mayor Vaughn tried to justify the oversight. The older man's face glistened with perspiration under the stress of Cross's icy stare. Vaughn stammered, She paid in full, Mr. Cross. Signed everything proper. Didn't seem like the sort to cause any ruckus. I'm sure we can find a way to—" Cross cut the mayor off with a glare. The man's voice was smooth but lined with a rattlesnake's menace. "You assured me, Vaughn, that every last acre I wanted would be mine. You said your office would handle proper channels. Now I hear that a new settler has walked right in and staked a claim on the land we needed most." He leaned closer to the desk, and the mayor involuntarily shrank back, nearly toppling his inkwell. "I do not like surprises." Swallowing hard, Vaughn reached for a tumbler of whiskey he kept on his desk precisely for these tense encounters. "Sheriff Ellis will handle it. He always does." A snort of derision escaped Cross as he recalled how easily he had swayed the so-called lawman. A handful of gold, a few well-placed threats, and the sheriff had become as malleable as wet clay. "You're certain," Cross said, each word deliberate, "he can fix it quickly? I don't want to waste time. That land near the creek is key. We need to be certain we can stake claims to the veins beneath it without the government poking its nose around." Mayor Vaughn's gaze darted to the half-empty bottle of whiskey. He was tempted to reach for it again, just to calm his nerves. But Cross's presence dissuaded him. This was not a man you wanted to appear shaky around. Mustering as much composure as his frazzled conscience would allow, Vaughn nodded. "I'm sure, yes. He'll deal with it quietly." Cross's mouth twitched in what might have passed for a grin. Quiet is best. That patch of dirt has silver so pure we could mint coins from it tomorrow. If word gets out, we'll have more competition than we can handle. Don't let me down, Vaughn. I won't tolerate incompetence. The mayor stood awkwardly, pushing back his rickety wooden chair. You won't be disappointed, Mr. Cross, he said, voice trembling despite himself. If Sheriff Ellis doesn't talk sense into the woman, well, we have other methods. Accidents do happen. Cross dipped his head in agreement, then stepped out into the twilight, the tails of his duster coat flapping behind him. He moved with a predator's grace, head high, posture straight. In the failing light, his silhouette seemed to stretch across the street, and as people caught sight of him, they averted their eyes. A hush fell over any group he passed, the same hush that might befall a group of mice when a hawk swoops overhead. Viper Cross thrived on that fear. It fueled him, justified his every wrongdoing as necessary. After all, this land, this entire territory, was his for the taking, if only he could remove the obstacles. He paused just outside the office, letting the warm evening breeze ruffle his collar. The stranger's name drifted through his thoughts for a moment. Miranda Vale. Come dawn, the sheriff would ride to see her. Cross would make sure it ended with one less headache standing in his path. He smirked at the notion that a single woman, alone in the wilderness, might pose any real threat. But Miranda Vale was no ordinary settler. If she'd wanted a safe life, she wouldn't have chosen a remote corner of the territory known for cutthroats and roving bands of ex-soldiers. She had once worn a Union soldier's coat herself, albeit secretly and with great risk. In the chaotic final years of the Civil War, rumors had spread of a mysterious sharpshooter known only as the Phantom, credited with rescuing prisoners and undermining Confederate lines. Her identity had never been confirmed, and most accounts assumed the Phantom was a man. That was exactly the way Miranda had preferred it. Anonymity had been her greatest ally. Yet the scars of war had remained, etched into her soul as clearly as the faint white line on her shoulder where a bullet had grazed her years ago. She had drifted from one territory to another, haunted by nightmares of gunfire and flames, always hoping she might finally lay down her weapons for good. When she stumbled across this neglected patch of land north of Greystone Gulch, it struck her as a place where she could plant roots, literally and metaphorically. No prying neighbors, no reason to suspect who she really was. She would grow vegetables in the garden, raise a few chickens, and maybe, just maybe, learn what peace felt like. That dream, however, had begun unraveling the moment she learned of Viper Cross's scheme. She'd heard rumors while traveling, families vanishing, ranchers found shot in the back, entire homesteads burned to the ground. The more she listened, the more she recognized the same cruelty she had faced in the war, and her old instincts stirred. Part of her had yearned to keep her head down, but another stronger part of her refused to stand by and watch injustice flourish. The phantom within her wasn't entirely dead. It merely lay dormant, awaiting the call to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. So early the next day, she prepared for a confrontation she knew would come. While the rising sun cast an orange glow across the sagebrush and boulders, she woke in her modest one-room cabin and set a kettle to boil. The crisp morning air carried the scent of juniper, and the horizon painted the sky in strokes of pink and lavender. She tightened the leather straps of a hidden shoulder holster, adjusting for a snug but comfortable fit. Beneath her skirts, she strapped a slender throwing knife along her calf, its handle worn from years of use. Miranda Vale might have posed as a simple homesteader, but she had not discarded her skill set. Before long, she heard the distant jangle of harnesses and muffled hoofbeats. Through a small gap in the cabin door, she watched as 3 riders approached. Sheriff Brody Ellis led the pack, flanked by 2 uneasy-looking deputies. She wondered which of them would be the first to speak. The sheriff brought his horse to a halt and called out, "Morning, miss. Vale, is it? Got some business to discuss regarding your claim." His voice feigned politeness, but she could sense the underlying tension, the subtle threat. If there was one advantage she held, it was that bullies always underestimated her. Stepping outside to meet them, she considered how to play this. Meek settler or defiant occupant with a hidden gun hand. Sheriff Brody Ellis was a man who prided himself on looking the part of the law. His star was polished to a high shine, and his revolver holster was adorned with fancy tooling. He carried himself like a model officer from a dime novel cover, but in truth his sense of duty had long been eroded by bribery and fear. Even now as he dismounted, he cast an apprehensive glance toward the hills, as though expecting watchers in the crags. His two deputies, men named Dale Rogers and Ernie Munson, looked younger and less certain. Dale's brow glistened with sweat. Ernie clutched his reins like they were a lifeline. "Miss Vale," the sheriff repeated, tipping his hat in a gesture that lacked sincerity. "We've come by request of Mayor Vaughn. There's some confusion regarding your land. Seems your claim overlaps property that belongs to other interests." His gaze skittered to the envelope in Dale's hand. Miranda stood her ground near the half-planted garden where a few rows of lettuce poked up through the soil. She wore a light blouse, her skirt dusty around the hem, and her hair partially hidden by a bonnet that offered a sliver of shade. The morning sun framed her face, revealing a calm expression that bordered on serene. "I wasn't aware of any confusion, Sheriff," she replied evenly. "I filed my claim with the land office. No one contested it then." "That's the thing," Ellis said, clearing his throat. He nodded to Dale, who handed over a plain envelope sealed with wax. "Here's a sum of money. A fair price for the land, you see. You'd be doing the town a kindness by accepting it and moving on. The buyer is quite generous." Miranda took the envelope, though she didn't open it. The polite smile she gave them was so unwavering it might have been carved from marble. "This is all very unexpected. I'd only just begun to till the ground for planting. Moving again would be a great inconvenience." Ellis's tone hardened. Better an inconvenience than a tragedy. His implication was clear, and his deputies shifted uneasily. They were used to strong-arming reluctant settlers, not forcing out single women with nowhere else to go. For a brief moment, pity flitted across Dale's face, but it was quickly replaced by resignation. Orders were orders. Miranda nodded slowly, tucking the envelope into her pocket. "Thank you for the offer. I'll consider it." Dale and Ernie appeared relieved, as though anticipating a quick resolution. Sheriff Ellis, however, eyed Miranda suspiciously. The faint lines around his eyes twitched, as if he sensed an undercurrent he couldn't quite place. "Make it quick," he said gruffly. "We don't like unresolved matters around these parts." With that, he remounted his horse, the deputies hastening to follow. The trio turned in unison, hooves stirring up small whirlwinds of dust as they rode away at a brisk trot. Miranda watched them disappear down the trail. She waited until their figures were specks against the shimmering heat before exhaling. Her hold on the envelope tightened. She knew exactly what such a bribe represented. In the war, she had seen desperate men take small fortunes to sell out their neighbors. This was no different. Only the players had changed. The question now was how to respond. Fold up her homestead dream and disappear as she had countless times before, or stand her ground even if it meant unleashing ghosts from the past? That afternoon, Miranda decided to make a supply run into town. The day's heat was oppressive, radiating off every surface like a furnace. Yet the dryness made the ride into Greystone Gulch oddly bearable. She preferred that arid clarity to the suffocating humidity of eastern towns she'd passed through. As she guided her horse along the main thoroughfare, townspeople stole glances from under wide-brimmed hats or behind half-shuttered windows. She recognized fear in their eyes, the same fear she had encountered in war-torn villages. People here had learned that speaking too freely could invite tragedy, so they guarded their words like treasured heirlooms. She tied her horse outside Eliza Sutton's general store, carefully removing her hat to wipe the sweat from her brow. Inside, the store felt only marginally cooler, but at least there was some respite from the sun. Eliza greeted her with a practiced smile. "Afternoon, Miss Vale. Need anything special?" Miranda placed the unopened envelope on the counter. "A few supplies. Flour, coffee, nails if you've got them, and maybe some information if you can spare it." Eliza's eyes flicked to the envelope. She recognized the wax seal, Mayor Vaughn's official crest. She raised an eyebrow but refrained from prying immediately. "I keep my store well stocked," she said, selecting items and setting them on the scarred wooden counter. "Though nails are getting scarce with all the construction going on around here." The unspoken reference to newly burned buildings and barns hung in the air. Picking up the envelope, Miranda turned it over in her hands. "There's talk of silver in these hills. You heard anything of the sort? Eliza hesitated. It was one thing to gossip about day-to-day oddities, another to confirm suspicions that could endanger one's life. Still, she felt an inexplicable desire to help the stranger, who carried herself with an unbendable will. They found a rich vein not long ago, a few miles from where you've staked your place. Rumor says Viper Cross has big plans. He buys people out, or he takes care of them if they won't sell. Like the Thayer family. She paused to glance around the empty store. Last month, their homestead caught fire in the middle of the night. They barely escaped with their children, wound up fleeing the territory altogether. Miranda's lips pressed into a thin line. She set the envelope down, unopened still, as though the money inside was tainted. I see. That's a grim story. Not the only one, Eliza replied softly, lowering her voice as if the shelves themselves might be listening. One family after another. If they don't leave, they vanish, and the sheriff does nothing but fill out a report before quietly filing it away. Some folks say if you go to him for help, you'll end up vanishing that much sooner. A spark ignited behind Miranda's eyes. Anger mingled with a sense of inevitability. She thanked Eliza, paid for her supplies, and stepped back out onto the porch. The weight of injustice hung on her shoulders. No wonder the town was so subdued. They lived under the constant threat of sabotage and violence. She glanced down the street. At the far end, she could see the mayor's office, its windows shuttered against the heat. Or perhaps shuttered against the truth. One way or another, she suspected she was done running from fights that needed fighting. That evening, with the last streaks of coral and gold vanishing from the sky, Miranda led her mare to the town's water trough. She reached for a ladle to slake her own thirst, savoring the cool relief on her parched throat. Across the way, a lantern glowed in the window of the Desert Rose Saloon, where piano music spilled out in ragged chords, punctuated by the rowdy laughter of men deep into their cups. The saloon door swung open, and out strode a small group of Cross's men. They moved like wolves, confident in their territory, and their conversation halted the moment they spotted Miranda. They followed her with their eyes, silent as predators, until one of them, Scarface Delgado, a lanky figure with a long-heeled burn scar along his jaw, whistled low under his breath. Look what the dust blew in. Ain't you the one giving the boss trouble about some worthless patch of land up by the creek? Miranda gave a mild shrug, refusing to display fear. I'm just watering my horse. She continued to stroke the mare's neck, keeping her face calm, even as she felt the tension radiating from the men. All it would take was a nod from Scarface, and the others would spring into violence. She had seen that brand of brash cruelty before, in the war. Drunken men with guns were rarely rational. Another one, stocky and with a sneering upper lip, chimed in. That land's already been spoken for, lady, and here you are, playing house on it. Not too smart. His hand hovered near his belt, a gesture that made bystanders hurry along their way. Nobody wanted to be in the path of a bullet. Miranda's left hand patted the mare's flank while her right hand, hidden from direct view, remained near the folds of her skirt, where a revolver lurked. I've not had a chance to speak with your boss, she said, voice steady, but I look forward to hearing his side of things. Her tone was all politeness, but her gaze was unwavering, a silent message that she wasn't about to roll over because of idle threats. Scarface exchanged glances with his companions. He seemed vaguely amused, if also perplexed by her nerve. Well, you might just get your chance, sweetheart. Viper'll want a word with you. Maybe more than a word. Viper. The other men chuckled, the sound laced with innuendo. Miranda recognized how swiftly such verbal sparring could become physical harm, but she also noted that they were testing her, measuring how quickly she might break. She had no intention of breaking. Not now. Not ever. A hush settled momentarily, and in that hush, Miranda became aware of other sets of eyes watching from down the street. A cluster of townsfolk had stepped outside to witness the scene, though none dared intervene. Among them was Nate Tucker, a young deputy recently hired by Sheriff Ellis. He wore a polished badge, so new it caught every flicker of lantern light. He looked anxious, torn between a desire to uphold justice and a fear of outrunning his own authority. When he made a half-step forward, the group of Cross's men glared in his direction, and Nate seemed to shrink back. Miranda decided then and there she would not cower. Not for her own sake, But for those eyes peering from stoops and windows, trembling for the day a hero might turn the tide. If the seeds of fear were all that had been planted in Greystone Gulch, it was time for something new to take root. Calmly, she guided her horse away, leaving Scarface Delgado and his gang to snigger in her wake. They would see soon enough that she was not like the others they had terrorized, and if confrontation was inevitable, she would meet it on her own terms. Inside the Desert Rose Saloon, Viper Cross lounged in a corner booth with a bottle of top-shelf whiskey, quietly observing the night's clientele. His presence there was more statement than necessity. By making the saloon his evening haunt, he reinforced the notion that Greystone Gulch belonged to him. Men gambled at nearby tables, women drifted about carrying trays of beer, and the piano man played an upbeat tune that failed to lighten the simmering tension in the room. A hush fell across the saloon when Scarface Delgado and his cronies returned. They sidled up to Viper's table. Delgado leaned in, a sly grin lighting his scarred face. "She's got spine, that one," he said, jerking his thumb toward the street. "Didn't even flinch when we told her how things are done around here." Cross's steely gaze lifted from his whiskey glass. "So she's not backing down?" he asked, his tone neutral. Delgado shook his head. Cross's lips curled in something resembling intrigue. "Interesting." He downed a shot of whiskey, the golden liquid catching the lantern glow. "Nothing more dangerous than a person who doesn't know when to be afraid." Delgado cleared his throat. "What's the plan, boss?" Cross motioned for the barkeep to refill his glass, then paused. "I want her to get the message without bringing too much heat. The last thing I need is the territory government poking around because people start turning up dead in broad daylight. Sheriff Ellis will pay her another visit. If that fails, I'll handle it in my own way." The final words emerged cold, final. Delgado and the other men nodded, clearly used to such orders. In a sense, they were relieved not to be told to kill her outright. Subtlety sometimes made their job easier. At that moment, Remy Cross walked in, Viper's younger brother, sporting a cocky grin and a bandaged right arm that told tales of an earlier scuffle. Remy slumped into the booth across from Viper, ignoring the uneasy looks of the saloon's patrons who were loath to linger too close to the Cross family. "Heard about our new neighbor," he drawled. "Can't wait to pay her a visit myself." Viper's jaw tightened. "Stay out of this, Remy. The last time you took matters into your own hands, we ended up cleaning up more trouble than it was worth." He gestured toward Remy's bandaged arm. "And you ended up with that to show for it." Smirking, Remy shrugged. "Some folks need a proper demonstration of who runs these parts. Didn't think a storekeep in the next county would be so quick with his shotgun." He picked up a half-finished glass of whiskey Delgado had left behind and took a swig. "But I won't do anything rash, brother. Let me at least talk to her. Maybe she'll see reason." Viper eyed him uncertain. He knew Remy's idea of talk often ended in intimidation and rough handling, but something about the challenge of a defiant newcomer obviously caught his brother's attention. "Fine," he said at length, "but keep it clean. We can't afford a high-profile killing, not when our silver shipments are about to ramp up. Understand?" Remy raised the glass in a silent toast, and the corners of Viper's mouth curved into a thin smile. No matter how fearless this Miranda Vale thought she was, she hadn't yet faced the full force of the Cross family. If she refused the next polite warning, that confrontation would be swift and merciless. Meanwhile, Miranda Vale was finishing up her errands. The lamps along Greystone Gulch's main street flickered, casting dancing shadows on the ground. She had just stepped out of the small telegraph office, where she had quietly sent a message to a contact in the next county regarding the suspicious nature of land deals here, when she heard her name called. "Miss Vale!" The voice belonged to Nate Tucker, the young deputy she had noticed earlier. He jogged toward her, breath catching in the cool night air. "Deputy," she greeted, tucking a slip of paper into her satchel. "What can I do for you?" Nate's youthful face reflected a mix of concern and admiration. "Listen, I saw what happened with Cross's men earlier. You ought to be careful. They've got a mean streak, and they don't like being made fools of." Miranda studied the sincerity in the deputy's eyes. He couldn't have been older than 19 or 20, full of the ideals that drew some men to pin a star on their chest. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not looking for trouble. I simply won't be bullied off my claim." Nate nodded, chewing his lip in uncertainty. I wish the sheriff felt the same, but well, he's not exactly looking out for folks. Once Viper Cross got his hooks into him, it was over. For a while, I hoped I could do something. Make a difference, you know? But every time I try, I'm told to stand down. If I push too hard, I'll lose my job. Or worse. Miranda placed a reassuring hand on Nate's shoulder. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up, even when every voice tells you to hush. If you see something truly wrong, do you plan to remain silent? Or do you plan to do your duty? A flicker of shame passed over the deputy's face, but also a seed of determination. I signed on to uphold the law. I never expected that the law could be twisted by men like Cross. If something big goes down, he trailed off, uncertain how to phrase his concern. I'll do what needs doing, Miranda said softly. You do the same. We'll let the rest sort itself out. With that, she offered him a small nod and turned to walk away. But Nate reached out as though another thought had just come to him. There was a family that vanished a few days ago, he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. The Lawson family from a homestead west of the gulch. No sign of them, except a burned wagon out near Devil's Fork. The sheriff wrote it off as bandits or maybe Indian trouble, but I overheard Cross's men bragging. I think they took the Lawsons. I think they're holding them somewhere. Miranda's gaze sharpened. The notion of captives being held by outlaws, likely over land disputes or leverage. She'd seen it before, and it never ended well. Thank you for telling me, she said, voice low. Stay vigilant, Deputy Tucker. If there's a chance to help those people, we'll find it. With that, she left the deputy standing under the glow of a flickering lantern, burdened by the truth that bigger storms were on the horizon. Over the next few days, Miranda kept to her homestead, rising at dawn to tend her garden and check on the handful of chickens she had acquired. She maintained a routine so mundane it could have belonged to any ordinary frontier woman. But behind that routine lay a methodical vigilance. She took note of hoof tracks on distant ridges, signifying watchers or scouts. She spotted a glint of metal on a nearby hill one afternoon, suspecting it might be a spyglass. Someone was keeping tabs on her, likely on orders from Viper Cross. That knowledge didn't unnerve her. It steeled her resolve. Late on the third day, she saddled her horse and rode out to check her fence line, a plausible excuse should any curious eyes track her movements. In truth, she planned to do some scouting of her own. She followed the creek north, letting the rush of water mask the sound of hooves on soft earth. The landscape changed subtly. The creek ran shallow here, winding through stands of cottonwood and willow. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with shifting light and shadow. It was there, half hidden by a copse of trees, that she caught sight of a lone figure on horseback, perched atop a low rise, scanning the horizon. Virgil Pierce was the name she'd overheard from one of Eliza's well-informed whispers, a skilled tracker in Cross's employ. By all accounts, he had once been a trapper, famous for his ability to read trails like a well-worn map. Now he used those skills to aid Cross's intimidation tactics. Miranda guided her mare behind thick brush, dismounting so quietly that only the gentle rustle of leaves announced her presence. She stood still, pressing a hand to the mare's flank to keep the horse calm. From her vantage, she could see Pierce's posture as he surveyed her homestead. He seemed to sense something was off, turning his head slowly from side to side. Within moments, he nudged his horse forward, vanishing deeper into the rolling hills. Miranda exhaled a soft breath. So they knew exactly how she went about her days. Pierce likely reported that she worked her land like any hardworking settler, that there was no sign of cunning or defiance in her routine, at least none that was obvious. Returning to the cabin by twilight, she pondered what her next move should be. She could surprise them at their game, but that might tip her hand too soon. She could ride into town, confront the sheriff publicly, but that could cause a spectacle that would endanger the innocent. The memory of Deputy Nate Tucker's words, the rumored disappearance of the Lawson family, nagged at her. How many families had Cross's men uprooted? And what was the end goal beyond greed for silver? That night, she lit a single oil lamp on her simple wooden table, her small cabin otherwise dark and silent. Thoughts raced through her mind, weaving together the fragments of a puzzle she was now compelled to solve. If the Lawsons were alive, she had to find them. If they were prisoners, freeing them would require either stealth or overwhelming force. Miranda smiled grimly at the irony. She had once vowed never to walk in the phantom's footsteps again, yet here she was, preparing for a covert rescue behind enemy lines. The war had ended for the rest of the country, but for her, some battles never truly ceased. True to Viper Cross's word, Sheriff Ellis did pay Miranda another visit, this time under more threatening circumstances. It happened on a blazingly hot afternoon, the sun baking the earth until the grass itself looked brittle enough to catch fire at the slightest spark. Ellis rode up with a different pair of deputies, both men as hulking as bouncers in a Denver dance hall. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust that drifted across Miranda's front porch. She emerged from her cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. "Afternoon, Sheriff. Something I can do for you?" He dismounted with a scowl, letting out a grunt of displeasure. "That offer we made, you've had time to mull it over. The mayor wants an answer. Now." One of his deputies reached for a folded document, possibly the same bribe, or maybe new terms. Miranda's heartbeat remained steady, though she feigned mild curiosity. "Is it typical for the town to pressure legal landowners to sell? I've heard of claims being contested, but never with armed escorts." "Let's not play games," Ellis growled. "We're authorized to remove you forcibly if you refuse to comply." She tilted her head, letting a slight smile cross her lips. "Remove me forcibly, you say? I hope your paperwork is in order, because from where I stand, it looks a lot like intimidation and extortion." Ellis's face darkened. He signaled to one of the deputies, who drew his revolver and pointed it at the dirt near Miranda's boots. "We ain't here for an argument," the sheriff snapped. "We're here to keep the peace. You stay. There won't be any peace, just accidents waiting to happen, like that barn that burned out by the Winston property last month, or the accidental shooting of a rancher who wouldn't sell." Miranda arched a brow. So they had resorted to open threats now. This was no mere suggestion. It was a stark warning that they were willing to kill her. A lesser person might have caved, but the phantom's calm seeped into her bones. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not leaving. If your peace involves terrorizing honest folks, then I guess we have different definitions of the word." The sheriff's patience snapped like a brittle twig. He motioned for his deputy to step forward. "Grab her. We'll take her to the mayor's office ourselves." Miranda's muscles tensed, every sense heightened. She'd practiced for moments like this, though in the war it had usually been behind enemy lines. Swiftly, she stepped back, using a pivot that sent the deputy's outstretched hand grasping at air. With a fluid motion, she hooked a foot behind his ankle and gave him a sharp push. He stumbled, crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust. The second deputy lunged, brandishing his gun. Miranda sidestepped, her hand flashing under her skirt. Before he could even register her movement, she pressed the muzzle of her revolver against his temple. "Drop it," she said, her voice low but commanding. Shock rippled through his face as the cold barrel of her weapon met his sweat-drenched skin. Eyes wide, he let his own revolver clatter to the ground. The sheriff stood there, jaw hanging open, unsure what to do next. For a tense second, the only sound was the pounding of hearts and the sizzle of heat in the air. Then Miranda eased back, releasing the trembling deputy. "If you aim to remove me forcibly, Sheriff," she said, "you'd best come better prepared." She lowered her gun but did not holster it entirely. Her eyes never left Ellis's face. "Now get off my land." Word of the altercation spread through Greystone Gulch by nightfall, carried on the lips of watchers who'd witnessed the sheriff's humiliation. Among them was young Nate Tucker, who listened in awe as a ranch hand breathlessly recounted how a single woman had disarmed two men without firing a shot. Nate's face glowed with a mix of excitement and dread. They'd never seen a single settler stand up to them with such audacity. "She's not some random fool," Cross continued. "This woman moves like she spent years in the saddle, maybe with a gun in her hand. We'll need to handle her ourselves." Delgado shrugged, though he looked less certain than usual. "We can pay her a visit tonight, boss. Make sure she knows her place." Cross shook his head. "She's not alone out there. Mark my words. Someone's backing her, or at least giving her information." He drummed his fingers on the tabletop. "Get Pierce to keep watch from the ridge. We'll figure out who's feeding her details. Meanwhile, I'll have a talk with Remy. He's the only one rash enough to test her directly." Across town, at Eliza Sutton's general store, Miranda stood in the dim lamplight, with Eliza herself and Dr. Gideon Cole, a soft-spoken physician who had once served as a field surgeon during the war. Gideon was pressing a piece of gauze to a small scrape on Miranda's arm, collateral from the scuffle with Ellis's deputies. "Doesn't look too bad," he said, stifling any further questions about how a supposedly ordinary homesteader had disarmed two men in seconds. "Might sting for a while, but you'll live." Miranda nodded, thanking him for his care. Eliza hovered nearby, a worried furrow creasing her brow. "Word is, Cross is fuming," she said. "Some folks claim he was spooked by how fast you were. Others think he's just waiting for the right moment to make an example out of you." Miranda glanced at the swath of black night visible through the store window. "Let him come," she said softly. "I'm tired of bullies winning just because no one stands up." Gideon and Eliza exchanged cautious looks. They admired her courage but knew that in these parts, a bold stance often led to an early grave. Still, no one voiced an argument to dissuade her. Outside, the street was dark, with only a few lanterns illuminating the wooden walkways. Despite the tension in the air, a faint sense of hope seemed to ripple through the townspeople who caught glimpses of Miranda's resolve. Maybe this was the shift they had been waiting for, a chance to see Viper Cross's iron grip loosen. Or maybe, some feared, it was the spark that would ignite a much larger fire, a fire that could burn Greystone Gulch to the ground. Either way, the die had been cast. There was no returning to the shadows for Miranda Vale. Late that night, as silence settled over the gulch, even the raucous saloon grew hushed, Miranda slipped out of Eliza's store. She preferred the cover of darkness for what she had in mind. With steady steps, she guided her horse through a narrow alley, ensuring that no patrols from Cross's men were nearby. Once she was sure she wasn't followed, she nudged her mare into a brisk trot toward the wide expanse of desert to the west. The moon hung low, bathing the landscape in pale silver. In the hush of midnight, the territory felt both vast and claustrophobic, a place where voices could echo for miles, yet secrets remained hidden behind every knoll. Miranda carried with her a coil of rope, a lantern hooded to reduce its glow, and the quiet determination that had guided her through countless covert missions in the war. The location she aimed for was a rumored hideout near Devil's Fork, where the Lawson family's burned-out wagon had been found. Nate Tucker's words about the family's disappearance wouldn't leave her mind. If there was any chance they were still alive, she had to see for herself, even if it meant going alone. The desert night was unforgiving, the temperature dropping sharply. The crunch of gravel and the distant calls of coyotes were her only companions. After what felt like hours of riding, she reached a narrow ravine nestled between two ridges. At the mouth of the ravine, scorched scraps of wood and twisted metal lay scattered, a grim reminder of some fiery event. Her lantern's feeble light revealed wagon spokes and blackened boxes. "Lawson's," she whispered, scanning the area. She dismounted and carefully moved forward, listening for any sign of watchers. The only sound was a breeze rustling the dried brush. Deeper into the ravine, she discovered tracks, human footprints, horseshoes and drag marks, leading to a yawning cave. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Had Cross's men stashed their prisoners here? She edged closer, every sense on alert. The entrance to the cave smelled damp and stale, a contrast to the crisp dryness of the desert air. If there was any chance those children were still alive, there would be no turning back. She retrieved her small revolver, holding it in a steady grip, and moved deeper. The darkness swallowed her, save for the narrow beam of light beneath the lantern's hood. Each step echoed, a slow drip of water somewhere deeper in the cavern, accenting the tense silence. Eventually, she reached a chamber where crates were stacked. Quick inspection revealed non-perishable food, water barrels, and bedrolls, enough to keep a group captive for an extended period. Yet no sign of the Lawson family themselves. Whatever had happened here, it seemed the outlaws had moved on. Or perhaps they never brought the family to this precise spot at all. Frustration built in Miranda's chest. She took a final scan, hoping for any clue, a note, anything that might tell her the family's fate. Nothing but shadows and the faint scuffle of rodents in the dark. Knowing she couldn't linger, she began her cautious retreat. A rescue mission was forming in her mind, but she needed more information, and she needed allies. Alone, she might save a few lives. Together, they might just save a town. Night clung to the desert like a dark shawl as Miranda Vale emerged from the cave near Devil's Fork. The excursion had left her tired but no closer to discovering where the Lawson family might be imprisoned, if they were even still alive. A hot wind hissed through the sagebrush, carrying dust that stung her eyes. She paused by a scraggly juniper to mount her mare, forcing herself to remain vigilant. The moon was high, casting stark shadows across the uneven terrain. She guided her horse carefully, thankful for the animal's sure-footedness in the shifting sand and rocky paths. As she rode back toward Greystone Gulch, her mind churned with questions. The crates in the cave suggested Cross's men had planned to hold captives, or stash contraband, for more than a day or two. The presence of a child's boot only confirmed that the Lawsons had been there at some point. Why move them? Were they being shuffled from one hideout to another to avoid detection? It reminded her of the war's darker episodes when Confederate camps relocated prisoners in the night to keep them from being freed by raiding parties. She suppressed the memory, burying it alongside too many others, best left unspoken. By the time she reached the outskirts of the gulch, the moon was sinking low. A faint glow on the horizon hinted at dawn's approach. Instead of returning to her homestead, she headed for the back entrance of Eliza Sutton's general store, confident that her new ally would be awake before sunrise to prepare for the day's trade. Sure enough, lights burned in the upstairs window. Miranda dismounted, tied her horse behind the store, and rapped softly on the back door. Moments later, Eliza appeared in a simple housecoat, blinking away sleep. "Miranda?" Eliza asked, eyes widening. "What on earth?" "I had to check something." Miranda kept her voice low, stepping inside to spare Eliza the chill morning air. The store's storeroom smelled of coffee, flour, and spices, all jumbled together in a dusty tapestry. "I went to Devil's Fork, found signs the Lawsons had been there, but they've moved on." Eliza paled, glancing up the narrow staircase that led to her living quarters. "God above, where could they have taken them? Do you think they're still—" "I don't know," Miranda admitted. "Fornum." Miranda accepted the offer, listening to the wind rattle the eaves, that constant reminder of the desert's silent watchfulness. For now, at least, she had a moment's reprieve before the next storm. By mid-morning, Miranda stepped back out into the bustling street, the sun's rays already casting sharp angles across the clapboard storefronts. "We found signs of them at a cave near Devil's Fork, but they're long gone. If anyone in town has heard rumors, we need to collect every scrap of information. Cross's men are moving them around." Nate exhaled, tension evident in the set of his jaw. "I'm trying, but the sheriff threatened to revoke my badge if I go behind his back. Being a deputy is all I've ever known." His words faltered when Miranda gripped his arm. "You told me you swore an oath to uphold the law. That oath matters more than a piece of tin on your vest. If they remove your badge, that might just free you to do what's right." A flicker of shame crossed his features. "I guess you're right," he murmured, straightening as though summoning courage. "Where do we start?" Miranda managed a slight, reassuring smile. "Talk to Dr. Cole. He treats a lot of folks who wander through, and people often confess things to a doctor they won't say to anyone else." She patted his shoulder, feeling a rush of relief that someone within the ranks of so-called law enforcement was on her side. "Stay vigilant, deputy," she said, stepping away, "and keep quiet about what we do until we have enough to act." As she continued down the street, she caught the disapproving stares of a few townsfolk, no doubt worried that her confrontation with the sheriff would bring them all fresh woes. Yet others, like the aging tailor who gave a subtle nod, seemed hopeful. High above, Nate realized his attempts at distraction had done all the good they could. He overheard angry voices echoing through the cavernous pit. "Someone's helping them! Check the hostages! Move!" Nate peered down from behind his rocky cover. Through the swirling dust, he saw shapes converging on the camp. In a split second, his eyes caught a glimpse of Miranda guiding a line of hostages along the shadowy edges of the quarry floor. But the outlaws were closing in fast, brandishing rifles and revolvers. One among them, a burly man with a bald head gleaming in the sun, barked orders. Clutching his shotgun tightly, Nate drew a steadying breath. He'd never shot anyone in cold blood, but he had sworn to protect the innocent. That was enough to make him squeeze the trigger. A booming shot reverberated through the canyon, and the bold outlaw stumbled, a cry escaping him as he hit the dirt. Panic rippled through the remaining outlaws. buying Miranda precious seconds. Yet as Nate ducked back behind the rocks, a hail of bullets pummeled his position. Pebbles and dust rained down on him. It was only a matter of time before one found its mark. He risked a glance for an exit route and spotted a narrow trail that snaked down the east side, half collapsed from years of neglect. If he could get down there, he might provide closer cover for Miranda and the captives. He reloaded with shaking hands, pushed himself up, and sprinted for the trail, keeping his head low. Meanwhile, Miranda knew they had to ascend or remain trapped. She scouted a wooden stairway, hammered precariously into the quarry wall. Judging by the broken boards, it hadn't been used or maintained in ages, but it was a direct path upward. She helped the Lawson woman place the children on the first few steps, coaxing them to be brave. The injured man, most likely Mr. Lawson, winced with each step, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. The younger captive, who introduced himself in a hoarse whisper as Carter Riggs, took up the rear, assisting Mr. Lawson as best he could. Gunfire cracked. One bullet splintered the wooden railing mere inches from the children. Miranda sprang forward, returning fire toward the muzzle flashes in the shadows. Each shot reverberated in her arm, but she hit one outlaw in the shoulder, forcing him to tumble behind a rock, cursing in pain. The rest kept up the barrage. A bullet whizzed past her cheek, close enough to leave a hot sting. She ducked, pressing herself against the rocks, her breath ragged. In the war, she'd been in tighter spots, but seldom did she have innocence to protect in such an exposed environment. Another round shattered a beam in the makeshift stairway, causing it to sag dangerously. The children cried out as the structure trembled beneath them. Her thoughts raced. Could they all make it to the top before the entire stairway collapsed or was riddled with bullets? She glanced upward and saw a flash of movement. Nate Tucker, precariously picking his way down the narrow east side trail. She met his gaze. He looked both terrified and resolved. In a single gesture, she signaled for him to cover them. Nate crouched, leveling his shotgun at the outlaws below and firing. Miranda seized the moment, urging the hostages to climb faster. Each step groaned under their combined weight. Dust from shattered rock filled the air, stinging eyes and throats. Another bullet struck a rung just inches away from Miranda's boot, sending her stumbling. She clung to the railing, knuckles white. "We're almost there," she lied, hoping the promise of safety would push the exhausted survivors onward. She could feel the entire structure swaying under the strain. One rung cracked, sagging beneath Mr. Lawson's foot, and Carter Riggs lunged to support him. For a fleeting instant, Miranda feared they'd all plunge to the quarry floor. But the broken rung held just enough, and they kept climbing, hearts pounding in unison. Step by precarious step, they neared the top, guided by a single beacon of hope, that if they could just reach solid ground, maybe Greystone Gulch still had a chance. Nate Tucker steadied himself on the ledge, heart drumming like a wild animal in his chest. Below him, he could make out muzzle flashes as the outlaws fired desperately at the ascending group. Miranda was among them, returning shots with deadly accuracy whenever possible. With each blast from her revolver, an outlaw either ducked or dropped. But they were outnumbered, and the rickety wooden stairway felt as if it might collapse at any moment. Swallowing hard, Nate planted his boots against the rocky ground, bracing the shotgun's stock against his shoulder. He peered down the barrel at two outlaws who crouched by a boulder, preparing to reload. Taking aim, he squeezed the trigger. The first outlaw went down hard, dropping his revolver. The second scrambled away, cursing. That gave Miranda and the captives another precious second or two to climb. Then disaster struck. A sharp crack echoed through the quarry. The central beam of the stairway snapped, weakened by bullet holes and the weight of so many bodies. With a shudder, a chunk of the structure tore away from the wall, tilting precariously. Screams cut the air. Miranda, the Lawson family, and Carter Riggs clung desperately to whatever handholds they could find. Nate's stomach lurched. "Hold on," he shouted, though his voice was lost in the din. He fired again, trying to keep the outlaws at bay. But he knew that if the entire stairway gave way, no amount of covering fire would save them from a deadly fall. Miranda gritted her teeth, wrapping one arm around a splintered support beam, while the children clung to her skirt. The beam swayed, dangerously close to ripping away. Adrenaline blazed in her veins. She glanced upward, saw Nate frantically waving, "Climb," he mouthed, gesturing to the top. The older Lawson child, a boy, maybe 9 or 10, managed to scramble onto a somewhat stable plank. With Carter's help, the boy pulled his younger sister up. Mr. Lawson, his face pale from blood loss, struggled to keep his foothold. Carter held him steady, but a renewed volley of gunfire shattered more planks. One bullet whizzed past Miranda's ear, another grazed Carter's leg, drawing a grunt of pain. She realized they couldn't linger any longer. With a single-minded focus, she pushed upward, ignoring every protest from her own weary muscles. They inched closer to the top, each movement painfully slow. Below, an outlaw took aim at them, only to be stopped by a shot from Nate that ripped through the man's side. Another guard tried flanking from a different angle, but Miranda spun, firing a single perfect shot that sent him crashing onto his back. The stairway groaned again, showering them with dust and debris. Finally, the children reached the lip of the quarry, where Nate caught their arms and pulled them to safety. Carter and Mr. Lawson followed, both grimacing in pain. Last came Miranda, breathing heavily, her hands slipping on a broken rung. For an instant, she was sure she'd fall, but someone grabbed her. Nate, leaning precariously over the edge. She locked eyes with him and pushed off the last plank. With a surge of effort, he hauled her over the brink. They collapsed onto solid ground in a tangle of limbs, lungs burning with dust and fear. Cries of relief filled the air. Carter and the Lawsons rolled onto their backs, gasping. Nate stared at the fractured remnants of the stairway, half of it dangling uselessly like a broken skeleton. Beyond it, at the quarry floor, the outlaws scrambled in disarray. The rescued group was alive, and for one critical moment, that was all that mattered. Miranda's knees wobbled as she stood, adrenaline draining from her body like water from a cracked canteen. She reached for the older Lawson boy, Peter, she learned, helping him to his feet. The girl clung to her mother, tears mixing with dust on her cheeks. Mr. Lawson lay still, his wounded leg stretched out awkwardly, while Carter Riggs pressed a hand to his own bleeding calf. Nate Tucker swallowed hard, seeing the state of their injuries. "We have to get them to Dr. Cole," Miranda said, breathing heavily. "Help me splint Mr. Lawson's leg enough for travel." Nate nodded, rummaging in a small pack he carried for any medical supplies. He produced a strip of cloth and a short length of wood meant for patching fence posts. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. Miranda gently ripped open Mr. Lawson's pant leg, ignoring the man's pained groan as she felt for broken bone. "Hold still," she murmured. "This is going to hurt." Together, she and Nate braced the leg as best they could, tying it with the cloth to keep it from shifting on the ride back. Behind them, a muffled gunshot rang out from the quarry below. One of the outlaws, apparently unwilling to let them escape without a final act of malice, fired up at the ridge. The bullet ricocheted off a rock, sending splinters of stone zipping past Nate's face. He flinched, heart pounding, before returning fire, forcing the outlaw into cover. They had little time before more trouble arrived. Moving quickly, Miranda and Nate helped the wounded into the saddle. Mr. Lawson needed propping against Carter, who hissed when the horse jerked. "I'll manage," Carter said through gritted teeth, patting the animal's side. "Just get us moving." Miranda hoisted the Lawson children in front of their mother on her mare. The mother, Anna Lawson, wrapped her arms protectively around them, tears of relief still wet on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to Miranda, voice trembling. "We thought we'd die down there." Miranda gave a tight nod, heart aching for what they had endured. "We're not out of danger yet," she cautioned, climbing onto the back of Nate's horse so she could still use her gun if needed. "Stay close!" They spurred their horses into motion, galloping away from the quarry's edge, just as another fusillade of shots spat dust at their heels. Nate took the lead, navigating through rocky outcroppings that would hamper any pursuers. The throbbing in Miranda's temples intensified as she glanced back, half expecting a posse of Cross's men to come tearing after them. But the outlaws likely needed time to regroup, especially after losing several men to bullet wounds. An hour's ride stood between them and the safety of Greystone Gulch, and every minute carried the risk of an ambush. Miranda exchanged a grim look with Nate. There would be no respite until they reached Dr. Cole. The horses snorted, hooves kicking up dust clouds in the waning light. Grim though it was, the ride back felt almost triumphant. They had accomplished the improbable. saved captives from the heart of Cross's operation. If the stories about missing families had circulated as far as neighboring counties, this rescue might be the spark that ignited broader resistance. In the distance, she saw the faint outline of the town. Night would soon settle again, but perhaps for the first time in a while, Greystone Gulch wouldn't go to sleep in hopeless fear. And yet Miranda wondered just how Viper Cross would retaliate once he discovered she'd robbed him of his hostages. The war was about to intensify. Of that she had no doubt. Their arrival in Greystone Gulch sparked a flurry of whispers and exclamations. As Miranda, Nate, and the rescued captives neared the edge of town, onlookers appeared on porches and boardwalks to stare at the ragged procession. A few recognized the Lawsons and gasped, hands flying to their mouths in astonishment. They had presumed the family dead or long gone. Others quickly rushed to fetch Dr. Gideon Cole, whose lantern bobbed in the twilight as he hurried toward them. "Over here," the doctor called, voice tinged with urgency. They guided the horses to a stop near the humble clinic, a small building originally intended as a dressmaker's shop, now repurposed for healing. Townsfolk crowded around, offering hands to help the wounded dismount. Anna Lawson let out a choked sob as bystanders gently lifted Mr. Lawson, carrying him inside on a makeshift stretcher. The children clung to their mother, eyes wide with shock. Eliza Sutton arrived moments later, pressing a hand to her heart at the sight of them. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You really did it." Her gaze flicked to Carter Riggs, who was helped off his horse by a burly rancher. The young man was pale, wincing at every step, but managed a shaky thumbs up. Eliza turned to Miranda. "Your arm, blood." Miranda looked down at her sleeve. A deep graze marred her bicep, where a bullet had evidently skimmed her in the quarry. She'd been too focused on everyone else to notice the sting. "I'll live," she said, though her vision swam for a second. Adrenaline had a way of masking pain until the crisis passed. Dr. Cole beckoned her inside. "I'll need to tend to all of you," he insisted, though his voice betrayed relief as he quickly inspected Mr. Lawson's fractured leg. The clinic's lantern light revealed the depth of the injuries: splintered bone, bruises, lacerations. He set to work with calm efficiency, calling for fresh water and clean cloths. Anna Lawson clasped Miranda's hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, her voice shaking. "We heard them talk about ransoms, about worse. My babies." Her words caught in her throat. Miranda squeezed her hand gently, fighting her own surge of emotion. "I'm just glad we got there in time." She glanced at the children, who huddled together like frightened birds. "Don't worry, you're safe now." Her tone was resolute, though her thoughts lingered on the many other families who hadn't been rescued in time. Outside, the crowd grew. Word spread that Deputy Tucker and Miranda Vale had saved the missing Lawson family, even bringing in another captive to boot. Faces once shadowed by hopelessness now lit with cautious optimism. A group of ranchers who had been on the fence about resisting Cross exchanged significant looks, as if silently acknowledging that maybe they had a fighting chance after all. Then came Sheriff Ellis threading his way through the gathering with an air of furious indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, eyeing the blood-stained bandages and exhausted horses. "What the devil were you two doing at that quarry? I didn't authorize any rescue operation." Nate Tucker lifted his chin, though fear flashed behind his eyes. "We got credible information about hostages, Sheriff. We acted on it. These people were going to die if we didn't intervene." Ellis's gaze darted over the wounded Lawsons, then narrowed at Miranda. "You had no jurisdiction to—" Miranda stepped forward, ignoring the throbbing in her arm. "They were in danger. We saved them. If you can't see that's more important than your so-called jurisdiction, maybe you're in the wrong job." A hush fell, townsfolk gawking at the direct challenge. For a moment, anger twisted Ellis's features, but the presence of so many witnesses, some of whom were seeing living proof of Cross's crimes, stayed his hand. He stood there, jaw working, as if searching for a retort that wouldn't incriminate himself or the Cross Empire. Ultimately, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed off, muttering about unauthorized nonsense. Nate exhaled shakily. "Well, that went about as I expected." Miranda wiped sweat from her brow. "It's just begun," she replied, her voice low but resolute. "We've drawn a line in the sand. Now we see who crosses it." That night, Greystone Gulch buzzed with restless energy. Some folks gathered around the Desert Rose Saloon, eager to share the extraordinary news of the Lawson family's rescue. Stories circulated like wildfire, how Deputy Tucker and that formidable woman stormed the quarry in a blaze of gunfire, outsmarting a legion of Cross's thugs. Miranda overheard a few such tales and almost laughed at the embellishments. There had been no legion, just a handful of outlaws. But letting rumors paint a picture of heroic defiance might serve the town's morale. Inside Eliza Sutton's store, Miranda sat on a stool, letting Dr. Gideon Cole stitch the graze on her arm. Eliza watched from across the room, arms folded, eyes flicking with worry. "We heard from Carter Riggs," she told Miranda quietly. "He's stable, and he's explaining some things to the Lawsons. Says they were held captive because Cross wanted leverage. Maybe to force the family to sign over more land?" Miranda nodded, wincing only slightly as the needle pulled thread through her skin. "Leverage is Cross's specialty, but maybe we've cut off one of his best bargaining chips. Without the Lawsons, he loses a chunk of power." Dr. Cole finished tying the suture and placed a clean bandage over the wound. "You should rest," he admonished. "That arm needs time to heal, and you've lost more blood than you realize. The same goes for the deputy, if I can get him to sit still long enough for an exam." Miranda offered a grateful smile. "I'll do my best. But we both know rest might be scarce if Cross retaliates." She rose, rotating her arm experimentally. The pain was dull but tolerable, overshadowed by a deeper concern. "How's Mr. Lawson?" Cole's voice softened. "He'll live, but that leg might not heal properly. We'll do our best, but he'll need weeks of care. The children are unhurt physically but traumatized. Anna Lawson, she can't stop crying. It's going to take more than bandages to fix what they've been through." A flare of anger twisted Miranda's gut. This was the true cost of Cross's empire. Broken families, shattered spirits. And it would continue unless more people stood up. She turned to Eliza. "I need to send word to the nearest government outpost. Maybe request a territorial marshal or a federal agent. Something official that can't be easily bought off." Eliza frowned. "That'll take time. And I heard Cross has contacts in those offices. If they intercept your request, then we'll just have to make sure it's delivered directly," Miranda said with renewed determination. "If we can gather enough testimony from the Lawsons and Carter, the territorial law can't ignore this." Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "I can arrange for a courier first thing tomorrow. We'll need statements, and we should collect all the other evidence, documents, bribe envelopes, anything that ties Cross to these crimes." Miranda patted the bandage on her arm absently, already plotting their next moves. "We'll compile it all, and if Cross tries to come at us in the meantime, we'll show him this town won't lie down like a beaten dog." Outside, a warm wind carried the smell of dust and midnight sage. A hush had fallen over the streets, as though Greystone Gulch were collectively holding its breath. In an upper window across the way, Miranda glimpsed a flicker of candlelight, probably some family too anxious to sleep. She understood the feeling. Wariness thrummed through her veins, a reminder that the struggle was far from over. With the Cross Empire wounded but not yet broken, the real test of Greystone Gulch's resolve was still to come. Morning broke in crimson and gold, finding Miranda Vale already astride her mare, heading out of town under the watchful eyes of citizens who had risen early out of curiosity or lingering fear. The plan was straightforward. She would ride to the next county's telegraph station, nearly a day's journey, and send a direct message to the territorial authorities, bypassing Greystone Gulch's own compromised officials. Eliza had prepared signed statements from both the Lawson family and Carter Riggs, sealed in a protective envelope. Nate Tucker, still wearing a fresh bandage on his temple from a grazing shot, stood by to reassure onlookers that the law was, at last, acting in their interests. Yet as Miranda reached the edge of town, she caught sight of a lone rider blocking her path, a silhouette framed against the rising sun. The rider wore a broad hat and a heavy duster, the coiled snake emblem visible on the saddle. Remy Cross. Tension snapped across the dusty street like an electric charge. People halted in doorways while a few braver souls ventured onto the walkways to see what would happen. Remy raised a hand in greeting, but his grin was more predatory than polite. "Going somewhere, Miss Vale? You sure got a knack for stirring up trouble." Miranda kept her mare steady, eyes narrowed. No trouble unless someone starts it. Move aside. He shifted in his saddle as though deliberating. I heard about your little jailbreak at the quarry. Quite the spectacle. My brother's none too happy you took what belonged to us. Miranda bristled at his use of belonged, as if the Lawson family were property. But I suspect you're off to do something even more damaging to our interests, Remy continued, tapping the coiled snake on his saddle. You'd best think twice. Her heart pounded, but outwardly she remained calm. Already thought thrice, she retorted, and I'm still leaving. Remy's grin soured. You have no idea what kind of storm you're calling down on this town. My brother built an empire that stretches beyond these dusty roads. You think we're just a handful of outlaws? He's got friends in high places. Miranda glanced around. Townspeople stood rooted in place, anxious to see if a gunfight would erupt. She spotted Nate Tucker and Dr. Cole among them, tension writ across their faces. You know, she said, raising her voice so others could hear, the more you threaten us, the more determined we are to stand. Maybe it's time Greystone Gulch stopped trembling at the sound of your name. A flicker of doubt passed through Remy's eyes, quickly replaced by anger. Brave words, he sneered, but words won't save you if you run afoul of the real power in these parts. Miranda edged her horse forward, refusing to yield the road. You sure you want to test that right now? She rested her hand on the hilt of a revolver holstered discreetly on her hip. While she had no desire to gun Remy down in the street, she wouldn't shy away if he forced her hand. For a moment, it seemed like a standoff might explode into bloodshed. But Remy merely spat in the dust, his eyes glittering with hatred. This ain't over, he muttered, yanking his reins. He turned his horse in a tight circle, hooves clattering, then galloped off, leaving a swirl of dust in his wake. Miranda exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. The townsfolk let out a collective sigh, some edging forward to congratulate her on facing down Remy Cross again. But Miranda's thoughts churned. Remy's threats rang true. The Cross Empire reached far beyond Greystone Gulch. If Viper Cross managed to pull strings elsewhere, this struggle could become a war not just for one town, but for an entire region. All the more reason, she told herself, to ride fast and get help before Cross tightened the noose around them. And with that, she spurred her mare onward, the sunrise at her back and the hope of reinforcements guiding her forward into the unknown. Miranda Vale rode hard for the next county, leaving Greystone Gulch behind in a swirl of desert dust. The journey through rugged passes and sun-scorched mesas tested her stamina. By noon of the following day, she was fighting both exhaustion and the relentless heat. The telegraph office at Cedar Bluff was a modest affair, a single-room shack surrounded by wind-gnarled pines on the edge of a larger town. She dismounted, her mare stumbling slightly, and pushed open the door. Inside, a wiry man with spectacles perched on the tip of his nose glanced up in surprise. I need to send a message, Miranda announced, voice hoarse from hours of writing. She produced the sealed envelope containing statements from the rescued Lawson family and Carter Riggs, along with her own account of Viper Cross's crimes. This has to go directly to the territorial authorities. Do you understand? The telegrapher eyed the official stamps on the documents. I can do that, he replied, adjusting his spectacles. But lines sometimes go down, or messages get intercepted. I'll wait and make sure it's sent, Miranda interrupted, leaning on the small counter to steady herself. And if there's a marshal or federal agent within 100 miles, inform them of the urgency. Greystone Gulch is under siege by a corrupt land baron. Her forceful tone made the telegrapher swallow nervously. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and began tapping out her message on the telegraph key, each series of clicks echoing in the silent space. Miranda listened intently, her heart thudding in time with the metallic beats. Her mind spun with the memory of terrified children, wounded fathers, and the haunting emptiness left by those families who had not been found in time. Once the message was sent, she sank into a wooden chair by the wall, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. But her reprieve lasted only a moment. She heard approaching hoofbeats outside, too brisk and numerous to be casual travelers. A quick glance through the dusty window revealed 3 riders dismounting. Their saddles bore the coiled snake emblem. A surge of adrenaline jolted Miranda upright. Either Cross or his men had anticipated her move. Stay inside, she hissed to the telegrapher, who paled. Without waiting for him to respond, she slipped through a side door. The midday sun nearly blinded her, but she forced her eyes to adjust, stepping around the building to get a clearer view. The riders, tough-looking men in trail-worn dusters, were scanning the small cluster of buildings, presumably for the woman who had dared to defy Viper Cross. Miranda's instincts took over. She moved swiftly between a row of stacked crates, keeping her footfalls light. If they found her, there would be a shootout right in the middle of Cedar Bluff. Her revolver felt reassuringly familiar in her hand. She edged close enough to hear their angry murmurs. "She has to be here. Remy said she'd come for the telegraph. Spread out. Boss doesn't want her slinking away again." Miranda's breath quickened. If these men intercepted her now, it could mean the death of more than just one messenger. She exhaled slowly, muscles tensing for a confrontation. She had come too far and risked too much to fail now. Steeling herself, she recalled the promise she'd made to Greystone Gulch, that the tyranny of Viper Cross would not stand. If it meant shooting her way out of Cedar Bluff, so be it. Nerves jangling, Miranda crouched behind the crates, deciding her next move. She could slip away. Her mare still waited in the shade behind the telegraph shack. But that risked leading the outlaws into the open, possibly endangering townsfolk if the pursuit spilled onto the street. Alternatively, she could confront them head-on. 3 men was no small challenge, but she'd faced worse odds. As she debated, a tall figure strode around the corner of the telegraph office, scanning for any sign of her. He wore a battered hat pulled low, revealing a jagged scar across his temple. The man's revolver was already in hand, his gaze roving the narrow alley. Miranda pressed her back against the crates, controlling her breathing. Just a few more steps, and he would find her. She needed a plan. Any plan. Before the man could draw closer, a clatter from the main street drew his attention. A passing freight wagon had rattled over a loose board, creating enough commotion to shift his focus. Seizing the opportunity, Miranda pivoted around the crates, aiming her revolver at the man's back. "Drop it," she commanded, voice cold. He froze. A second passed like an eternity. Then the outlaw slowly raised his hands, letting the revolver slip from his grip. The noise alerted the other 2. Footsteps pounded behind her. With no time to think, Miranda thrust the first man forward, using him as a shield. A gunshot rang out. The second attacker's bullet tore into the captive man's shoulder, eliciting a pained yell. Miranda whirled, returning fire in one smooth motion. Her shot found its mark, dropping the second outlaw instantly. The echo of gunfire boomed in the narrow space. The third man shouted an oath, ducking behind a water barrel. Miranda's heart pounded. She had effectively neutralized 2, but still faced a trained gunman. The first man slumped at her feet, groaning in agony. She had no illusions about mercy from the third. If he got a clear shot, he'd kill her without hesitation. She crouched, scanning for movement, ears tuned to any shift in the scuffle of boots. "Give it up, lady!" the remaining outlaw called from behind the barrel. "You're cornered!" Miranda swallowed, ignoring the sweat stinging her eyes. "I could say the same for you," she retorted, steadying her revolver. The alley had become a deadly puzzle. One wrong angle, and a bullet would find her. She inhaled, then darted forward. Sure enough, a muzzle flash brightened her peripheral vision. She fired twice in response, heart thumping so loudly it nearly drowned the thunder of gunfire. A pained shout confirmed her shots had landed. Then silence. Breathing hard, Miranda advanced, revolver raised. The man lay sprawled, a bleeding wound in his side. She kicked his revolver away, checking to ensure he posed no further threat. Overhead, the sun beat down mercilessly, as though indifferent to the violence it lit. The outlaws were down. 2 badly wounded, 1 dead. All because they dared intercept her mission to summon real justice. A tremor coursed through her, not from fear, but from the sudden letdown of adrenaline. She forced herself to remain alert. The telegrapher peered out from the doorway, eyes wide with horror at the sight of carnage. "Send word that Cross's men just attacked a messenger," Miranda rasped. "Let them know I'm heading back to Greystone Gulch as soon as I can." She reloaded with shaking hands, her mind returning to the townsfolk who waited, uncertain of their future. If help came, it wouldn't arrive for weeks, maybe more. In that window of time, Cross would surely make a move. Resolved, she grabbed the reins of her mare, swung into the saddle, and set off, leaving the wounded outlaws to the local law. She had a town to protect, and if an outright war was coming, She intended to be ready. Back in Greystone Gulch, the atmosphere crackled with a new tension. The daring rescue of the Lawson family had emboldened some townspeople, while others fretted that Viper Cross would unleash a wave of retribution. Mayor Vaughn had grown skittish, all but barricading himself in his office, refusing to face the public. His closeted deals with Cross weighed heavily on his conscience, and rumors suggested he was drinking more than usual to cope. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brody Ellis attempted to maintain a facade of calm authority, though his relationship with Deputy Nate Tucker had frayed past mending. One afternoon, Ellis cornered Nate outside the jailhouse. "You've been stepping out of line," the sheriff growled, slamming the door behind him. "Running around with that woman, stirring up trouble." Nate glared, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "We saved a family, Sheriff. We brought back proof of Cross's crimes, which you promptly ignored. How's that for justice?" The older man bristled, color rising in his cheeks. "Keep that tone, Tucker, and you'll lose more than your badge. I've got half a mind to toss you in a cell for insubordination. The next time Cross or his men have a complaint, you stay out of it, understand?" Nate didn't respond. He simply turned on his heel and strode away, not trusting himself to speak. He knew Cross had an iron grip on Ellis, yet seeing the sheriff so brazenly dismiss the truth made him sick. If the town's designated defender was compromised, who was left to uphold the law? A woman with a concealed revolver and a deputy with a target on his back. That seemed to be it. A few hours later, Nate found himself meeting secretly with Eliza Sutton in the back of her store. She was sorting through inventory, but her mind was clearly elsewhere, her motions mechanical and anxious. "Miranda's telegram should be on its way," she said. "But we can't just wait around for cavalry that might never come. Any luck rallying local support?" Nate exhaled, leaning against a shelf stacked with flour sacks. "A handful of ranchers are open to standing up against Cross, but they're scared. They've got families to protect, herds to manage. They see what happened to the Lawsons and think, that could be me next time." Eliza nodded grimly. "At least folks are talking about forming a militia or something like it. But we need real training, real tactics. A few shotguns and some old muskets won't do much against Cross's professional killers." They both fell silent, each weighed down by the enormity of the task. Since Miranda's departure, news had spread that Cross was summoning reinforcements. Men loyal to him were said to be on the move from distant camps. The timeline was unclear, but the threat was real. One traveler claimed to have seen a band of at least 20 men riding under the coiled snake emblem. Another insisted that was an understatement. Nate squared his shoulders. "We do what we must," he said. "Miranda will come back, and until then, we hold out. If Cross wants to tighten his noose, let's make sure we don't stand still and wait." Eliza's tense features eased slightly in gratitude, but deep down they both sensed the clock was ticking toward a brutal showdown, and the real question was whether Greystone Gulch had the backbone to fight back, or whether fear would crush them before a single shot was fired. Days later, Miranda returned at dawn, exhausted, battered, but resolute. She rode into Greystone Gulch just as the orange glow of sunrise ignited the ridges beyond town. Despite the early hour, she spotted figures milling about, as though sleep had eluded them. Curiosity and relief lit the eyes of those who realized she had come back in one piece. The battered telegraph office at Cedar Bluff had been just the start of her return journey. She'd also sought out small ranching communities along the way, quietly spreading word that the town was on the brink of revolution against Cross. She reined in her mare outside Eliza Sutton's store, nearly toppling from the saddle. Nate Tucker, who had been sleeping in the store's back room since his falling out with Sheriff Ellis, appeared instantly, rushing to steady her. "You're hurt," he exclaimed, noting her bandaged thigh and the weariness in her face. "Nothing new," Miranda managed, leaning on him for support. "Ran into some of Cross's men in Cedar Bluff. Had to make my point." She let a mirthless smile slip before her expression turned grim. "Got the telegraph sent, though. The question is whether the territorial authorities can get here in time." Eliza pushed open the door, eyes widening. "Thank heavens you're alive. You look half-starved." Swiftly, she helped Nate guide Miranda inside, where they eased her onto a chair. The store smelled of coffee and gun oil, both necessary staples these days. "Any good news?" Eliza asked, searching Miranda's face for a hint of optimism. "I managed to speak with a sympathetic ranchers group. Miranda replied, wincing as Nate peeled back the makeshift bandage on her leg. They're not large in number, but they're skilled riders and marksmen. If Cross makes a move, they'll ride to help us. Also heard rumors that Cross's father, Colonel Jericho Cross, might be heading this way. He's an ex-Confederate officer known for guerrilla tactics. She paused, letting that sink in. If it's true, the fight we've seen so far might only be the prelude. Eliza stifled a gasp. Viper Cross is terrifying enough, but if his father's half as cunning, he's worse, Miranda said, her tone hollow. She had heard stories of Colonel Cross during the war. Swift raids, merciless campaigns, entire towns subdued through fear. Like father, like son, it seemed. They're building something bigger than a land grab. They want control, not just of Greystone Gulch, but any settlement with silver or strategic value. Nate tore a strip of cloth from a clean bolt of fabric on the store shelf. Let me wrap this properly, he muttered, focusing on Miranda's wound. His fingers trembled slightly. The gravity of her words was getting to him. We'll get you patched up, then figure out how to handle this. Miranda gritted her teeth as he tightened the bandage. Thank you, but we don't have much time. We need to organize. Eliza, can you gather folks here tonight? We'll hold a meeting. No, a council of war. The town has to decide whether to hide or fight. Eliza straightened. I'll spread the word discreetly. Some might be too frightened to show, but enough want to see Cross gone. Perhaps we'll have a real turnout. Miranda nodded gratefully, although uncertainty gnawed at her. If Colonel Cross was truly en route, Greystone Gulch was about to face a battle unlike any it had endured. Her thoughts drifted to the children she'd seen playing in the dusty street. Would they live in a town freed from tyranny, or witness their home burn under a warlord's wrath? One thing was certain, fear would not silence her. Not anymore. That evening, under a sky streaked with indigo and silver, a clandestine gathering took shape in the dimly lit back room of Eliza's store. Word had gone out quietly. All those willing to stand against Cross should come prepared to plan, to pledge, or to walk away forever. Miranda settled herself at a rough-hewn table, wincing slightly as her bandaged leg protested. She was weary but determined. At her side stood Deputy Nate Tucker, jaw set in unwavering resolve. Across from them, Dr. Gideon Cole and Carter Riggs, still nursing his own injuries from the quarry rescue, hunched over lantern-lit maps. Around 24 townspeople crammed into the small space. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a few farmers, and even 2 of the saloon's bartenders. Notably absent was Mayor Vaughn, who had locked himself in his office, and Sheriff Ellis, whose loyalty had become so questionable that no one had bothered to invite him. The murmurs of conversation died as Miranda rose, balancing against the tabletop. Thank you all for coming, she began, scanning the group. I know it takes courage to meet here tonight. By now you've heard rumors of Colonel Jericho Cross joining his son. If that's true, Greystone Gulch won't just be dealing with a band of thugs, but an organized force determined to seize control of this region. We can't stand alone if they bring in dozens, maybe hundreds of men. Our best chance is to make a stand here, with the help of neighboring ranchers and any official reinforcements that might arrive in time. A bearded rancher named Garrett Mullins folded his arms. I got a wife and kids, Vale. I can't just pick up a gun and go to war. Miranda nodded, expecting such fears. I understand. None of us wants violence. But if Cross overtakes this town, do you think your family will be safer? Look what happened to the Lawsons, to every homesteader who refused to sell. Hiding isn't going to keep them safe. It'll only delay the inevitable. Carter Riggs spoke up, leaning on a crutch. I've seen their camps, folks. They're not just rustling cattle or burning barns. They're gearing up like an army. If you don't defend your homes, trust me, they'll claim everything, and they'll do it without remorse. Dr. Cole added quietly, and I've been treating the wounded. I've seen what Cross's cruelty does to families. If we don't push back, we're giving him license to tear us apart piece by piece. A hush fell over the room as the townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Beryl Thompson, one of the saloon bartenders, stepped forward. She was slender, but carried herself with a quiet confidence. I'm in, she declared. Man like Viper Cross ran my cousin off his ranch last year. We never heard from him again. I'll do whatever it takes to keep my kin here safe. One by one, voices rose in agreement. Garrett Mullins exhaled deeply and nodded. Even the store's quiet clerk, who'd said little all night, volunteered to pass messages or help gather supplies. A sense of fragile unity began to form, though Miranda could tell fear still gnawed at many hearts. This was a step into the unknown, an everyday group of townspeople preparing to fight a well-armed menace. "Then it's decided," Miranda said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "We organize, we train. We gather every scrap of proof we have, and with luck, the territorial law will arrive before we're overrun. But if Cross attacks first, we'll be ready. Greystone Gulch won't die without a fight." The chorus of murmured assent carried a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long while, fear wasn't the only force guiding their future. Under Miranda's direction, Greystone Gulch transformed seemingly overnight. Those who could handle firearms spent their mornings drilling behind the old livery stable, where straw bales became targets. Deputy Nate Tucker led basic marksmanship sessions, instructing ranchers and shopkeepers alike on how to load, aim, and fire. It was a far cry from professional military training, but it instilled a crucial sense of agency. Even if their shots weren't perfect, at least the townsfolk no longer felt utterly helpless. Meanwhile, Dr. Cole turned the ramshackle clinic into a triage center, stocked with bandages, herbal remedies, and what meager medical supplies he could scrape together. He worked alongside a couple of volunteers, teaching them how to disinfect wounds and set broken bones. "If there's a fight," he explained soberly, "we need more hands than just mine ready to patch people up." Eliza Sutton spearheaded the logistics. She turned her general store into a makeshift command post, keeping track of who had volunteered supplies: grain, salted meat, spare clothing, bedding for the wounded. Old Bob, the local carpenter, improvised barricades at key intersections, using scrap lumber and metal sheets hammered together. After a single day, the town's main street looked less like a dusty frontier outpost and more like a fort in progress. Miranda oversaw it all, fighting through her own healing injuries. When she wasn't demonstrating quick-draw tactics or discussing defensive strategies with Nate, she was checking in on Carter Riggs, who continued to gather intelligence from travelers passing through. His easy manner and half-healed limp made him seem harmless, which let him glean tidbits of information from unsuspecting sources, like a gambler who'd heard rumors of Colonel Cross's approach. "The Colonel is only a few days away," Carter reported grimly on a sweltering afternoon. "Word is, he's bringing at least 30 men, possibly more. They've already put the squeeze on some smaller settlements, forcing folks to hand over supplies. They're calling themselves the Cross Legion." He spat on the ground, disgusted. Viper Cross has convinced them he can turn these little towns into his personal empire. Miranda's jaw tightened. "Then we have fewer days than I'd hoped. If the territory's marshals don't arrive soon, we'll face that legion ourselves." She glanced at the makeshift fortifications and the earnest people training in the dusty lot behind Eliza's store. "We've done what we can, but I won't sugarcoat it. We might be outgunned." Nate, overhearing, joined them. "We've still got the ranchers you spoke with. They sent word they'd come if trouble started. Between them and our own folks, we can put up a decent fight." His voice sounded more confident than his eyes looked, but Miranda appreciated the effort. For the first time in years, the old sense of battlefield tension coursed through her blood, a mixture of dread and fierce protectiveness. In the war, she had fought to free prisoners, to disrupt enemy lines, always in the shadows. Now she stood in the light, teaching ordinary citizens how to defend their homes. The difference was both empowering and terrifying. If Cross unleashed his men, there would be no quiet infiltration, no sneaking hostages out by night. It would be a brawl on the main street, with bullets flying and lives on the line. By dusk, the day's preparations ended as lamps flickered awake in windows up and down the street. Families huddled inside small cabins, some praying, others methodically readying rifles they hadn't touched since the war. Miranda stepped onto the boardwalk, listening to the subdued hum of the town's uncertain heartbeat. One thought reverberated in her mind. If Viper Cross and his father believed fear alone would conquer Greystone Gulch, they were about to learn the power of a community determined not to bow again. Near midnight, a rider approached from the western trail, an urgent pace kicking up silvered clouds of moonlit dust. Eliza Sutton, up late inventorying supplies, heard hoofbeats clatter on the empty street. Alarmed, she raced outside, shotgun in hand. The figure halted in front of the store and rasped, "Need to speak with Miranda Vale." Eliza recognized the horse. a chestnut mare belonging to a rancher from the neighboring settlement. She beckoned the rider, who all but collapsed off the saddle. "Get inside," Eliza murmured, guiding him through the store. She fetched water while he gasped for breath, dust caking his sun-creased face. "I'll get her. Just sit tight." Moments later, Miranda entered, flanked by Dr. Cole and Nate Tucker. The rancher, Wyatt Garcia, struggled to his feet, removing a worn hat that revealed sweat-drenched hair. "Vale," he managed between labored breaths. "Cross's men, they hit our place, took supplies, threatened to burn us out if we didn't pledge loyalty." Miranda's eyes narrowed. "Is your family safe?" "Scattered," Wyatt admitted, voice trembling. "Some fled to the hills. Others surrendered. But I got a way to warn you. Cross is only a few miles behind me, maybe a day's ride. He's got at least 20 men, all well armed." Eliza's face went pale, but Miranda steadied herself with a deep inhale. So it was happening. Cross's final push to crush any resistance. "You did the right thing coming here. We'll offer you shelter and medical attention. Is there anyone else heading our way?" Wyatt shook his head, swallowing hard. "Not that I know of, but ranchers from the south might be on their way. They were organizing, said they'd send riders to help. Don't know if they'll make it in time." Dr. Cole laid a reassuring hand on Wyatt's shoulder. "Sit down. Let me check you over." The exhausted man complied, shivering despite the heat. Nate exchanged a meaningful glance with Miranda. The confrontation they'd all braced for had come to their doorstep with startling speed. Emerging onto the boardwalk outside, Miranda and Nate surveyed the sleeping town. Windows glowed faintly in a few cabins, but mostly Greystone Gulch slumbered. "We have to warn everyone," Nate said quietly. "If Cross arrives by noon tomorrow, we need folks in position by dawn." Miranda gave a curt nod. "We've practiced for this. We'll set watchers on each approach to the town, have signals ready if they see dust on the horizon. Dr. Cole and Eliza can run the central hub here. Let's also move the wounded, like Mr. Lawson, to the safest spot, probably the old church basement." Nate sighed, the weight of leadership hanging heavy on his young shoulders. "What if we can't hold them?" Her eyes hardened. "Then we do what we must for as long as we can. This is our line in the sand." They split up to rouse the town, each knocking on doors and explaining the urgency. Fear etched every face that greeted them, yet no one retreated. Instead, men and women alike set about moving furniture to barricade certain streets, prepped extra firearms, and gathered in prearranged posts around the dusty perimeter. Sleep was out of the question now. Even a few children carried buckets of water or loaded shells with trembling fingers. Come morning, Greystone Gulch no longer looked like a mere frontier settlement. Makeshift defenses rose at either end of the main thoroughfare, and every vantage point had a lookout. Miranda, perched on the second-floor balcony of an abandoned boarding house, gazed over the silent fortifications. Beneath her stern focus, she remembered every scar of war etched onto her body and soul. This was different. This was a fight for a community's right to exist without terror, and she intended to see it through, whatever the cost. Dawn arrived in a haze of purple and gold, bathing Greystone Gulch's makeshift fortifications in soft light. Wind stirred the dusty street, carrying the distinct tension of a powder keg about to explode. On the edge of town, a watchman suddenly blew a horn, 3 sharp blasts. Miranda's pulse spiked. It was the signal that riders were approaching from the west. She hurried downstairs, legs still aching, but adrenaline surging. Locals rushed into their positions. Some crouched behind barricades, others took rooftops with rifles. Nate Tucker sprinted from the jailhouse, shotgun in hand, fear and resolve mingling on his face. "They're here," he muttered. "Let's hope we're ready." At the far end of the street, dust clouds announced the arrival of horses. A line of riders emerged from the shimmering horizon, led by none other than Viper Cross himself. He was flanked by Remy Cross on one side and a tall, stern figure on the other. Colonel Jericho Cross, clad in a worn Confederate officer's coat, a relic of the war. They brought at least 24 men, each bearing the coiled snake emblem. Miranda's chest tightened. The rumors had been no exaggeration. As they rode closer, the townsfolk could see the grim set of the colonel's face. Despite the wrinkles and flecks of gray in his hair, he carried himself with a commanding air, his gaze sweeping over the barricades as if assessing a battlefield. Viper Cross's own visage was twisted with anger, likely fueled by the memory of defeats he had suffered at Miranda's hand. Remy Cross tried to wear his usual smug grin, but even from a distance, Miranda sensed unease in his manner. They halted just outside rifle range, Colonel Cross studying the scene with chilling composure. After a moment's silence, he spurred his horse forward a few paces. His voice, surprisingly soft yet carrying authority, rang out across the hush. "Who among you claims responsibility for this uprising?" Miranda stepped from behind a barricade, careful to keep enough distance to avoid a sudden shot. "We stand together," she called, voice projecting with a confidence she barely felt. "You won't take this town. Not now. Not ever." Colonel Cross's lips curved into a thin smile. "Ah, you must be Miranda Vale. My son spoke of you. Said you fancy yourself a hero." He glanced around at the armed citizens. A ragtag militia defending a worthless settlement. How quaint. "My men and I seek only to restore order under a new leadership, one that ensures profit for all who obey." Murmurs of anger rippled through the townsfolk. Miranda squared her shoulders. "We've seen your brand of order: intimidation, kidnapping, murder. There's no profit in living on our knees." A faint snort escaped Viper Cross, who guided his horse a step forward. "You won't have any life at all if you keep this up. My father's been lenient so far." "Lenient?" Deputy Nate Tucker blurted, stepping up beside Miranda. "You burned homes and imprisoned families. If that's your idea of leniency—" Jericho Cross silenced him with a raised hand. "We have no quarrel with small people," he said evenly, "but we won't tolerate rebellion. Surrender your arms, accept my son's guidance, and life continues. Resist, and you will be crushed." Miranda's gaze swept her fellow townsfolk. She saw fear, yes, but also the same determination that had led them to fortify their homes. "We choose to stand," she replied, her voice ringing in the morning air. "We've had enough of bending to men who kill and steal for power. Greystone Gulch isn't for sale." For an instant, silence reigned, the desert wind the only sound. Then Colonel Cross's expression hardened to stone. "So be it," he said coldly. "Riders, advance." A thunder of hooves erupted, and the final conflict began in earnest. What followed was a storm of dust and gunfire that transformed Greystone Gulch's main street into a battle zone. Colonel Cross and his mounted men spurred forward, expecting to overrun the crude barricades in a swift charge. But the townsfolk, braced behind wagon frames and nailed together planks, unleashed a volley of gunshots that cracked through the morning air. Horses reared, outlaws ducked, and the momentum faltered. Miranda, stationed at a corner behind an overturned buckboard, lined up her revolver sights on a rider who aimed a rifle at the near barricade. She fired, her shot striking him in the shoulder. He toppled from the saddle with a scream. Another outlaw tried flanking the position, but Carter Riggs, firing from the roof of a nearby feed store, picked him off with a crisp retort of his carbine. Deputy Nate Tucker joined the fray from behind a water trough, blasting away with his shotgun as the attackers drew close.